In less than 20 years, the Chinese economy became the second largest in the world, surpassing countries that, throughout modern history, were giants. It's important to note that in the 1980s, the Chinese economy was weak, small, and poor. That country revolutionized the concept of growth and showed the entire world that not only the West can grow rapidly. Back then, this Asian nation had a little over $1 trillion, while the United States, the world's largest economy, had a GDP of $10 trillion. By 2020, however, the size of the Chinese economy had already surpassed $14 trillion, an astonishing number. So why does the Chinese economy grow so much? In 1978, the Chinese government announced a reform that launched an important program to overhaul its entire economy. This reform encouraged the formation of rural companies and private businesses, liberalized foreign trade and investments, relaxed state control over some prices, and invested in industrial production. In 1978, before these reforms, China had almost negligible annual growth. After implementing these economic policies, China's average growth rate soared to 9% per year. To give you an idea of how astounding this is, that figure is higher than the American growth rate during its golden age. But returning to the Eastern nation, all this was made possible because the country's reforms significantly increased the average productivity of the Chinese people. The reforms opened up more room for private ownership and granted greater autonomy to managers and property holders. Whereas in the year of the reforms, 1 out of every 5 Chinese worked in industry, by 1994, 3 out of every 5 were employed in the industrial sector. After Mao Zedong took power, China completely closed itself off from the outside world, as Mao's policies were extremely isolationist. In 1978, long after Mao, the opposite was done with the Chinese to attract foreign investment. China's open-door policy greatly fueled its economic transformation. At that time, foreign investment was almost non-existent. But by 1994, it had already exceeded $100 billion. This influx of foreign capital built factories, created jobs, and, most importantly, connected China to international markets, while facilitating significant technology transfers. What attracted foreign companies to China was essentially the tax incentives and the country's cheap labor. Moreover, the Chinese economy wouldn't have grown so much without its population. China was already the most populous country in the world. In 1960, it had just over 600 million inhabitants, but by 2020, its population had grown to nearly 1.4 billion people. That is, the entire Chinese population is larger than, quite literally, the entire population of the American continent. Furthermore, this has undoubtedly boosted China's wealth. A workforce of more than 1 billion people working toward prosperity certainly helps the country's growth, and it has turned China into the world's factory throughout its history, providing both the labor and the capital needed to attract foreign companies. This was exactly one of the major factors that drove the country's development. Imagine an international investor who needs to expand his business and must build a new factory. He would have 2 options. Option 1. Invest in an expensive country with high labor costs, receive little financial support, and pay high taxes. Option 2. Invest in a country with cheap labor, low costs, and government incentives. However, cheap labor couldn't last forever, at least. That's what the Chinese government believed. They transformed the country's education system, making globally important subjects like mathematics a focal point. This shift has ensured that Chinese students consistently rank at the top when it comes to education. It's no wonder that China invests heavily in education, much like Finland and even Japan, which is reflected in the top positions of the PISA rankings, the global program for student assessment. One of the most striking examples of this progress is the construction of an extremely large and, more importantly, very fast railway network. In fact, China is the second country in the world with the largest railway system. If we look at other nations that have invested in rail, the United States stands out with the largest railway network in the world. This infrastructure investment has contributed to extremely rapid development. Rail transport makes moving products and people extremely cheap and fast, spurring the growth of various cities and states. Combined with investments in urban infrastructure, such as in Shanghai, one of the world's largest cities with billions invested, this has enabled Chinese factories to finally export their products, further bolstering the country's wealth. This is the Chinese reality, a country that was once impoverished, where today an average Chinese citizen is wealthier than an average Brazilian. The nation's wealth was built over time its development, education, infrastructure, and, most importantly, economic reforms have allowed it to easily become the second largest economy in the world. And that is precisely why China grows so much.